My name's Logan. I'm 19, and 4 months ago, I packed up everything I had and left my hometown of Austin, Texas for the bright lights and big dreams of New York City. I got into med school. Yeah, the real deal. People always think it sounds impressive, but they don't realize what it takes to survive here, especially when you're broke and alone. My dad's a surgeon, works nonstop at a university hospital back in Dallas. My mom's always been the stay-at-home type, the kind who organizes spice racks and trims rose bushes like it's a job. Growing up, I never worried about money. We lived in a 2-story home in a gated community. I went to private school, summer trips to Florida, normal. But that was then. Now I'm here. In a shoebox apartment that smells like burnt toast and old plumbing. I'm juggling 3 part-time jobs just to cover rent and instant noodles. My parents pay my tuition, which I'm grateful for. But every other expense, that's on me. Food, books, laundry, subway fare, even toilet paper, all mine. I thought college would be freedom, new friends, parties, clubs, late-night diner runs. But instead, I'm just tired. All the time. I tutor 2 high school kids who hate math. I work security for boring events where I stand still for 6 hours and smile at people who pretend not to see me. And on weekends, I pull shifts at a bar in Brooklyn. It's noisy, sticky, and smells like spilled beer and regrets. By the time I get home, my back aches and my brain is mush. I tried calling Mom for help once. Just a little cash. Nothing crazy. Maybe a couple $100 to make it through the month. She sighed like I'd asked for her kidney. We're stretched thin, Logan. Paying your tuition already takes everything. We really can't send more. I didn't even ask to speak to Dad. He's always either in surgery or asleep. It's like talking to voicemail with a heartbeat. So I swallowed my pride, smiled at my coworkers, and kept grinding. But the stress? It started showing. I couldn't keep up with lectures. I zoned out in anatomy lab. I nearly cut my own finger dissecting a dummy arm. When midterms came, I bombed 2 out of 4, had to retake them in August. So instead of a break, I crammed for retests. Once those were over, I hit every job I could get. My plan? Stack enough cash over summer to cut back on hours in the fall and actually focus on school. That meant eating 99-cent noodles, riding my bike everywhere, skipping hangouts, and saying no a lot. Friends from class would text, "Let's hit the park. Movie night at Sam's. Beach trip this weekend?" I'd type back, "Can't. Work shift. Maybe next time." After a while, they stopped asking. One friend didn't, though. Zach. He'd always message to check in. "You good? You look wiped at school." "I'm okay. Just working more lately," I'd reply. "You're grinding too hard, man. Let's chill when break ends." I promised we would. But then, everything cracked. It was a Friday night, packed bar, music blasting, people yelling over each other. I'd been running orders back and forth for 3 hours straight, barely stopping to drink water. And then everything tilted. The tray in my hand slipped. I staggered. Someone shouted my name, then Black. Next thing I knew, I was in a hospital bed with a saline drip and a nurse telling me I passed out from exhaustion and malnutrition. Yup, I'd worked myself into the ER. They let me go the same day. Said I needed rest, fluids, and real food. I nodded, thanked them, and left, clutching my discharge paper like it was a trophy in a race I didn't want to run. The train ride back was quiet. My reflection on the subway window looked pale and sunken-eyed. I messaged my boss from the bar to apologize. He told me he was the one who called the ambulance. Said he'd tried shaking me awake, but I was out cold. Also, he called my parents. I froze. "Take the rest of the month off," he said. "Don't worry about your shifts. Just recover." That meant no paycheck. Again, I curled into bed when I got home, phone on my chest, head spinning. I missed a message from Zach during the chaos. "Hey, haven't heard from you. Everything all right?" I finally texted back, explaining everything. Within an hour, he showed up, bags of groceries in hand. He made spaghetti and garlic bread, real food, and we ate like kings for one night. Between bites, I told him everything. The jobs, the money, the silence from home. He frowned. "Your dad's a surgeon. He should be helping you." I shook my head. "Mom said they can't. That tuition alone is stretching them. You're an only child though, right? That doesn't add up." I paused. He leaned in. "Logan, what if something's wrong? Like, what if your dad isn't working anymore?" I hadn't thought of that. My chest tightened. I remembered the last time I went home, Dad's Mercedes in the driveway, Mom's pristine rose bushes. Everything looked normal, but appearances can lie. I pulled out my phone and sent a message to Mom. "Are you and Dad okay?" She replied an hour later. "We're fine, don't worry." But I did worry, because suddenly everything felt off. Why would they hide something from me? Unless they were protecting me, or ashamed. I needed answers. and I'd be home for the holidays soon. For barely 24 hours, but enough to find out. Zach smiled. Bring me back something from Texas. All right? I laughed. Despite everything. You got it. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't know, was that my one-night visit home would uncover a secret I never saw coming, and it would change everything I thought I knew about my family. When I landed back in Austin for winter break, I wasn't even thinking about the weather or the food or the weird nostalgia that hits when you step off the plane and see familiar roads. My mind was spinning with questions I hadn't dared to ask over the phone. Something wasn't right, and I needed to know the truth. The whole flight, I played out different versions in my head. Maybe Dad lost his job, maybe they were sick and didn't want to worry me, or maybe they'd invested in something and it went south. But every version seemed worse than the last. The second I saw my parents waiting at the airport, I could tell they were surprised to see me. Not in a good or bad way, just surprised. My dad looked at me, really looked, and his eyes narrowed. You've lost weight, he said. It wasn't a compliment. My mom gave me a brief hug and avoided eye contact. On the way home, we didn't talk much. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't easy either. Like there were too many words hanging in the air, and nobody wanted to be the first to cut through them. At lunch, Mom had made her usual spread chicken wings, salad, some kind of creamy soup I didn't recognize. It looked normal. It smelled like home. But it didn't feel like home. We sat down together, the three of us, and Dad glanced at my plate before speaking. Are you eating properly in New York? I didn't sugarcoat it. Honestly, no, not really. His brow furrowed. What do you mean? I hesitated but figured there was no point hiding it now. I usually eat cheap stuff. Instant noodles, some bread, maybe prepackaged meals if they're discounted. He blinked. What about the cafeteria food? I laughed once, dry and short. Too expensive. He looked at me, eyebrows raised. How much is it? Like $5 a meal, I said. Sometimes more. Dad leaned back in his chair, visibly confused. Wait, is the money I've been sending not enough? I froze. The fork in my hand paused midair. What money? He looked even more puzzled. Logan, you haven't been getting any money? No. I've never received anything, I said slowly. He turned to Mom. Paisley, have you been transferring the allowance to Logan like we discussed? Her face tightened. She didn't respond. I looked between them, heart starting to race. My dad's tone sharpened. Paisley, answer me. Have you been sending the money? After what felt like an eternity, my mom spoke, barely above a whisper. No, I haven't. The room dropped into silence. You know that kind of silence where the air feels heavy and everything else fades. That you haven't sent him anything? For 4 months? She nodded. Why? Dad asked, genuinely confused. We have money. I've been working non-stop. His tuition's covered. What's going on? My mom looked down. I watched her hands tremble slightly as she reached for her glass. I've been keeping it, she said quietly. I thought he'd manage. He's smart. Medical students can earn more than regular students by tutoring, right? She tried to sound logical, but it came off as cold. You knew he was struggling. You knew he collapsed at work, Dad said, his voice low, controlled but furious. That's when it hit me. He didn't know. You didn't tell him? I asked her. You didn't say anything? She shook her head. I was afraid he'd find out I wasn't sending the money. I didn't want to deal with the fallout. Dad stood up. You mean to tell me our son nearly passed out from working himself to the bone, and you didn't tell me because you were hiding something? She didn't answer, but she didn't deny it either. I just sat there, numb, trying to process that the person I trusted most had let me suffer while lying to both of us. Dad didn't explode. He wasn't the type, but his silence said enough. When he finally spoke again, his voice was icy. So, what have you been using the money for? There was another pause. Too long. Mom's next words felt like bricks falling onto the table. Debt? She said. I've accumulated some debt. How much? He asked. Eyes locked on her like a laser. 100,000, she answered, barely audible. I couldn't believe it. 100,000? My brain scrambled to understand. Dad looked like he'd been hit with a truck. How? He asked. You don't work? You don't shop that much? Where is that money going? She hesitated again before finally confessing. Gambling. I choked on my water. You're serious? I asked. She nodded. Casinos. Online games. It started small. I won at first. It felt good. Then I started losing. I kept thinking I could win it back, but it just got worse. Dad dropped his fork. So while our son was skipping meals and passing out from overwork, you were out gambling our money away? I never meant for it to go this far, she said, her voice cracking. It was supposed to be temporary. Just a little fun. Something to do. Fun? Dad's voice broke for the first time. You gambled away our savings. You lied to me. You let our son starve so you could have fun? I didn't think it would affect him this much, she whispered. We don't even have debt, he said, shaking his head. The house is paid off. I make good money. There's no reason he should have suffered. I know, she said. I'm sorry. I didn't know what to do. You could have told the truth, I muttered. You could have asked for help. I was ashamed, she admitted, and scared. Once I realized how much I owed, I couldn't stop. I kept thinking one more win would fix it. Dad stood up. We're getting a divorce. That word hit harder than everything else. What? She gasped. No, please. We can fix this. You don't want help. You want rescue. There's a difference, he said, grabbing his coat. I'll pay the debt. But after that, we're done. There won't be any assets split. You've already taken more than enough. You can't just leave, she said, rising from her chair. Watch me. I sat frozen, my appetite gone, my heart pounding like a drum in my ears. She turned to me. Logan, please, talk to him. I stood up too. You're asking me to fix this? After what you did? I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just walked out. I needed air. I needed time. I needed to process the fact that the reason I had been starving, overworked, and exhausted in New York was sitting across from me at the dinner table the whole time. I stepped outside and just stood there, letting the cold air settle into my chest. The sky was cloudy, gray like someone had turned the color down on the whole world. I didn't know what to do with the weight sitting in my stomach, or the fact that the one person who was supposed to protect me had been quietly pulling the rug out from under me for months. I wasn't angry in the loud, explosive kind of way. I was just stunned, hollow. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't check it. Probably Zach asking how the visit was going. How could I explain any of this? That my mom had gambled away my support money while pretending we were too broke to help? That my dad had found out over lunch and was already talking about divorce like it was a decision made weeks ago instead of minutes? I eventually went back inside. The house felt colder than the air outside. I didn't say anything, just walked straight to my old room and shut the door behind me. My backpack was still on the bed, half zipped, like it didn't know whether I was staying or going. I sat on the edge and let my head fall into my hands. I could hear them arguing downstairs. It wasn't loud, but it was tense. My dad's voice, calm but razor sharp. My mom's voice rising, then breaking, then falling quiet again. I didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. He was done. She was desperate. I closed my eyes and let the noise blur into the background. I didn't sleep much that night, just laid there, staring at the ceiling, listening to my own thoughts spin in circles. I kept thinking about all the nights I'd stayed up late in New York, tutoring kids who didn't care, scrubbing sticky bar counters, dragging myself home half dead from double shifts. All because I thought there was no other way. I believed them. I believed we were tight on money, that they were struggling just to pay tuition. That I needed to pull my weight like some responsible adult. And all that time, the help was there. It was just being redirected into a casino. The next morning, the kitchen smelled like brewed coffee and burnt toast, like Mom had tried to do something normal. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were swollen, probably from crying all night. She didn't say much, just placed a plate of eggs and toast in front of me and sat across the table. Dad wasn't there. Probably out already. Or maybe just avoiding the awkward silence. I poked at my food but didn't eat much. I wasn't mad anymore, not in the way I expected. I just felt betrayed. Like I'd been carrying bricks I didn't even need to pick up in the first place. I'm sorry, she finally said. I didn't mean for it to get this bad. I nodded, not because I forgave her, but because I'd already run out of words. What else was there to say? She'd made her choices. Now we were all living with the fallout. My flight back to New York was later that afternoon. I had originally planned to stay a little longer, maybe visit a friend or two, but after everything, I just wanted to leave. The house felt like a museum of broken trust. Dad drove me to the airport. The ride was mostly silent. At one point, he said, I'll start sending your allowance directly to you from now on. No more middleman, you just focus on school. I nodded. Thanks, Dad. He kept his eyes on the road. I'm sorry you had to find out like this. I should have checked in more. It's not your fault, I said. I didn't want to worry anyone. Still, he said, gripping the wheel tighter, you should have never been in that position. At the gate, he hugged me and told me to take care of myself. He looked tired, older than I remembered, like everything that happened had drained something out of him. When I boarded the plane, I stared out the window, trying to feel something other than guilt and confusion. I didn't know whether to be relieved that the truth was out or heartbroken that it had to come at such a cost. Back in New York, life moved on. The semester started again. With the money Dad sent directly, I cut back on my work shifts. I finally had time to study properly, to rest, to breathe. My grades improved. My energy came back. Zach noticed immediately. "Dude, you're a whole new person. You actually look alive." I laughed. Yeah, turns out not starving and sleeping more than 4 hours a night makes a difference. We started hanging out more coffee after class, late night ramen runs, actual weekends off. For the first time since I got to the city, I felt like a real student. Like I was living the life I was supposed to have all along. But the relief was mixed with something else, a nagging thought I couldn't shake. Mom wasn't getting better. My dad told me he'd filed for divorce a few weeks after I left. She resisted at first, but eventually gave in when she realized he wasn't going to budge. He agreed to take on her debts, to avoid any drawn-out legal mess. No asset division, just a clean break. It sounded fair on paper, but it didn't feel like closure. I still worried. Not because I wanted things to go back to how they were, but because part of me still hoped she'd get help. That she'd choose recovery over denial. But that's not what happened. According to my uncle, her brother, she kept gambling. Even after the divorce, even after losing everything, she started showing up at casinos alone, trying to win back what she lost. She racked up more debt. Eventually, her own family cut her off, said they couldn't afford to help her anymore. She finally got a part-time job at a local grocery store, minimum wage. First time working in years. She's also in therapy now, not because she wanted to be, but because her lender threatened legal action if she didn't show some effort to change. I wish I could say I felt better knowing that knowing she was finally getting help brought peace. But it didn't, because the damage was already done. I forgave her in the quiet kind of way you do when holding on to anger just keeps hurting you. But I never forgot, and I never will. People think betrayal looks like screaming matches and slammed doors. But sometimes, it's silent. It's eating stale bread in a freezing apartment while your parents think you're just being independent. It's learning your sacrifices were unnecessary. It's trusting someone who's supposed to have your back, only to realize they were watching you fall and saying nothing. That kind of betrayal doesn't scream. It whispers, and it stays with you. But I'm learning to let go, not because she deserves it, but because I do. I'm building a life where I don't have to constantly fight for survival. I'm studying more, sleeping better, and dreaming again. I'm still cautious, still careful about who I trust, but I'm healing, slowly, quietly, one step at a time. And maybe that's enough for now. The weeks after I returned to New York passed faster than I expected. Winter melted into early spring, and for the first time since I started college, I didn't feel like I was drowning. With my dad sending money directly to me, I didn't need to take every job that came my way. I cut back to just one tutoring gig, a few hours a week, and finally had space to actually be a student. I was still adjusting to the idea that I had time, real, uninterrupted time to rest, to study, even to be bored sometimes. It was unfamiliar, but I didn't hate it. My grades went up, my health improved, and the dark circles under my eyes started fading. I stopped rushing through everything like my life depended on the next paycheck. I still felt guilty sometimes, like I hadn't earned this new stability, like there was some catch waiting around the corner. But I reminded myself that this wasn't luck. It was just the result of someone finally doing the right thing. Dad didn't say much after the divorce papers were signed. He kept his messages short, mostly updates about my allowance or random check-ins about how I was doing. I think he was still processing everything in his own quiet way. He never said it, but I knew he felt like he'd failed somewhere, like he should have seen the signs earlier. I didn't blame him, not really. We all wanted to believe things were fine because that was easier than facing the cracks. But now that the truth was out, none of us could go back to pretending. As for my mom, I heard bits and pieces from relatives back in Texas. She had moved into a small rental unit outside of town and was working part-time at a corner store. The debt wasn't gone, just frozen temporarily, and therapy was now part of her weekly routine. According to my uncle, she still hadn't fully accepted responsibility. She talked about bad luck more than bad choices, claimed she only kept gambling because she felt trapped, like she had no other option. It was hard to feel sympathy when I remembered her telling me I'd figure things out while I was living off discount food and collapsing from exhaustion. But at the same time, part of me wanted her to get better. Not for me, not even for Dad, just for herself. I didn't want her to keep spiraling. I didn't want her to be the kind of person who chose addiction over family forever. That kind of healing wasn't mine to manage, though, and I stopped pretending it was. I started saying no more often, not just to jobs, but to guilt. I let myself enjoy things again, slowly at first. A slice of decent pizza, without thinking about the cost. A movie night with friends without worrying about how many hours of sleep I was losing. Zach remained one of the constants through it all. He never pried for details, just stayed around, made dumb jokes when I needed to laugh, and showed up with soup when I got sick in March. We'd sit on the floor of my apartment, watching old movies or ranting about school. There was something grounding about his presence, steady, simple, real. One night we were walking back from the grocery store, carrying plastic bags that kept cutting into our fingers, when he said out of nowhere, "You seem lighter now." Not like physically though, yeah, you've got your color back, but just less heavy, you know? I didn't know how to respond at first. It caught me off guard. But he was right. I had been carrying weight for months, maybe years, and somewhere along the way I'd started letting go. "Yeah," I said finally. "I think I just stopped trying to fix everything I couldn't control." "That's growth, my guy," he said, smirking. "You're becoming a wise old man before you hit 20. I laughed. Great. Next I'll be yelling at pigeons and drinking black coffee for fun. But deep down, his words stuck with me. I had changed. It wasn't just about having more money or fewer shifts. It was the way I viewed myself. I no longer saw exhaustion as a badge of honor. I didn't feel like I had to prove anything by breaking myself just to stay afloat. I started showing up differently in class, in conversations, even with myself. When professors offered extra credit opportunities, I took them not out of desperation, but because I had the capacity to care again. When classmates asked if I wanted to join their study group, I didn't instinctively say no. I let people in, just a little, and it felt less like weakness and more like balance. I wasn't fixed. I was still figuring things out. But I no longer lived with that constant edge of panic that used to hang over everything. I stopped checking my bank balance every morning like it was a life or death situation. I began to trust that I could handle whatever came next. One afternoon I got a letter from my mom. Not a text, not an email. An actual letter with her handwriting on the envelope. I hesitated before opening it. Part of me wanted to throw it away, but curiosity won. It was short. She said she was sorry again. Said therapy was harder than she expected. Said she missed me. There was no ask for forgiveness. No dramatic declarations. Just a quiet acknowledgement that she knew she'd hurt me, and she hoped someday I'd be willing to talk. I didn't write back. Not yet. I wasn't ready. Maybe I would be someday. Maybe not. Either way, I knew I didn't owe her anything. My healing wasn't a bargaining chip. It was mine, and I could protect it however I chose. That realization gave me more peace than any apology ever could. The semester rolled on. I made it through finals without crashing. My professors noticed the change. A couple even pulled me aside to say they were impressed by my progress. I didn't tell them why things had changed. I just smiled and thanked them. Some stories don't need to be told in full. Not to everyone. By the time summer came around, I had lined up a research internship through one of my professors. It didn't pay much, but it was a step in the right direction toward the future I actually wanted. I wasn't scrambling to survive anymore. I was building something slowly, but for real this time. And maybe that was the most important thing I'd learned through all of it. You can't control the people who break your trust, but you can decide what happens next. You can learn when to step back, when to rest, when to stop chasing approval, and start protecting your peace. I didn't come to New York expecting to learn any of that. I thought I was just coming to study medicine, but life had other plans. And now, with everything that's happened, I understand that being strong isn't about doing everything alone. It's about knowing what to let go of, and who not to carry with you. Summer in New York feels like walking through a heated tunnel with no escape. The air gets heavy, thick with city smells and subway dust, and every breeze feels like it missed its appointment. But this time, I wasn't dragging myself through it. I had purpose, a plan, and most importantly, I had space in my head that wasn't crammed with survival math. My research internship started mid-June. It was with a small team working under a cardiovascular specialist who had published more papers than I'd read in my entire first year. The lab was on the 5th floor of a teaching hospital, with fluorescent lights, coffee-stained counters, and an endless stream of quiet focus. It was the kind of place where people didn't look at the clock every 5 minutes. They were just there, focused, present. I found it intimidating at first. Everyone seemed smarter, faster, more experienced. But then I realized they weren't judging me. They were just doing their work, like I was supposed to. I wasn't behind, I was just beginning. I got assigned a small project analyzing post-op recovery patterns in patients under 30. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. I got to see charts, interpret data, sit in on patient case reviews, and even observe a few surgeries from the gallery. The first time I watched a bypass procedure, I stood frozen, hands on the glass. watching my dream unfold on the floor below me. That was the moment it clicked. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was moving forward. Every hour I spent in that lab felt like a step towards something I actually wanted. Not just to be a doctor like my dad, but to become someone who didn't need to justify their ambition to survive. Outside of work, life kept shifting. Zach and I became closer. Not in a dramatic way, just naturally. The kind of closeness where you don't count the time because it just feels easy. We started hanging out more after I finished at the lab, cooking pasta together, swapping music, crashing at each other's places when the heat got unbearable. I never said anything out loud, but I think we both knew something had changed. There was a quiet comfort in it, a soft rhythm that made the chaos of everything else feel manageable. And maybe that's what I needed all along. Not someone to save me, but someone to sit beside me while I figured out how to save myself. My dad and I talked more now. Not daily, but enough to feel connected. He'd ask how the internship was going, send a few articles he thought I'd like, and occasionally slip in stories about his own med school days. For the first time, our conversations felt balanced. Less parental, more human. He never mentioned my mom unless I brought her up, and when I did, he kept it short. "She's still in counseling," he said, once. And working. It's slow, but she's doing it. I didn't press. I didn't need details. I just needed to know that she hadn't completely disappeared into the hole she dug. As for her, she sent 2 more letters over the summer. I read both. One was hopeful. The other was messier, more raw. She talked about feeling like a stranger in her own life. She said she missed the version of herself that used to wake up early just to clip flowers for the kitchen table. She said she was trying. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, but because I was still learning where my own boundaries lived, and I knew I couldn't go back to being the person who made excuses for her while paying for her silence. One evening in late July, I got a call from my uncle, the one who had been keeping tabs on her. He sounded tired but clear. He told me she'd finally admitted to having a gambling addiction. She had enrolled in a proper recovery program. Not just counseling, but real group meetings, accountability sessions, the whole thing. He said she was different. Not fixed, not healed, but aware. She doesn't ask for money anymore, he said. She asks for time. I didn't know what to do with that information. I thanked him and hung up. Then I just sat there for a while, thinking about how strange it is when people finally take the first real step. It's never loud. It's not a movie scene. It's just a quiet shift, like a door creaking open. I started to wonder if maybe, someday, I could walk through it too. But not yet. That night, I sat with Zach on the rooftop of his building. The sun had already dipped below the skyline, and the sky was painted with that smoky pink you only get in cities that never sleep. We didn't talk for a long time. Just let the breeze fill the silence between us. At some point, he asked, "Do you ever think you'll go back?" I didn't have to ask what he meant. To visit, maybe. To live? No, that chapter's closed. He nodded. "You're not running anymore, though. That's different." "Yeah," I said, and I meant it. It is. In August, the first wrapped up my project and submitted a report to the research director. He gave me thoughtful feedback, said I had a good instinct for detail, and offered to write me a letter of recommendation when the time came. I walked out of the hospital that day feeling taller. Not physically, just emotionally. Like my spine finally remembered how to stand straight. I wasn't just a tired student anymore. I was someone who had weathered storms and still managed to chart a course forward. That weekend, I cleaned my apartment from top to bottom. Not because it was messy, but because I wanted a reset. I opened the windows, changed my sheets, replaced my instant noodle stash with actual groceries. I even bought a small plant for the windowsill, something green and stubborn, like me. As I stood there watering it, I thought about everything that had happened in the past year. The collapse, the lies, the debt, the disappointment, and then the quiet rebuild, piece by piece. It hadn't been easy, and it wasn't over, but I'd stopped measuring progress by how far I had to go. Now I measured it by how far I'd come. From collapsing on a bar floor to standing here, sun on my face, future in my hands. I didn't need a perfect life. I just needed one that felt like it was mine again. Fall came faster than I expected. The city started shedding its summer heat, trading sweat for sweaters, noise for wind, and urgency for something slower. Classes resumed. The trees in the park turned gold, and I found myself walking more often without music in my ears, letting the quiet do the talking. I wasn't the same person who arrived here a year ago with wide eyes and a tight budget. That version of me had been hopeful, scared, and ready to prove something. But now, I didn't feel like I had anything to prove. I was just trying to live honestly. One afternoon, I got a text from my dad. No small talk, Just a photo of a new apartment with the caption, "Finally moved in. Clean slate." I stared at it for a long time. The muted blue couch, the bookshelf already half filled, the kitchen light flickering slightly in the corner of the image. I texted back, "Looks peaceful." He replied with a thumbs up and said, "You've earned some peace too. Don't forget that." It stuck with me longer than it should have. I didn't know how often sons got to hear that from their dads, but it felt like something I'd been waiting to hear without knowing it. I think he was healing in his own quiet way, unpacking more than just boxes. He was rebuilding the part of his life that had crumbled without warning, and I respected him for that. He hadn't tried to make me pick sides. He just stayed steady, even when everything was splintering. As for my mom, I still hadn't responded to her last letter. I'd read it enough times to have parts of it memorized. She talked about guilt, about memory, about the weight of choices that feel small until they snowball into something unrecognizable. She said she understood if I didn't want to see her again, but she hoped I'd at least remember the times when things were good. I did remember, but I also remembered how it ended. How silence became strategy, how lies replaced love. That kind of betrayal doesn't get erased by words, even honest ones. Still, I didn't hate her. Not anymore. Hate is too heavy to carry forever. I'd already put that burden down, and forgiveness wasn't something I needed to announce. It was a quiet decision I made for myself. Not a gift for her. I was still figuring out what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted with her in the future. But for now, distance was clarity, and clarity was peace. That was enough. Around mid-October, I got invited to speak at a student panel for incoming freshmen. It was supposed to be casual, just a Q&A about surviving your first year in medical school. When it was my turn to share, I looked at all the nervous faces in the audience and realized how different I felt standing in front of them. I talked about burnout, not in the theoretical way people write in textbooks, but in the way it feels when you forget the last time you ate something with actual nutrients. I told them how it felt to fail a test you studied for with your last ounce of energy, how shame can sound a lot like your own voice. But I also told them that survival wasn't the only option, that rest is a right, not a reward, that sometimes strength looks like asking for help before everything falls apart. When I finished, a few students stayed behind to talk. One girl said, "I thought I was the only one who was already drowning." I looked her in the eye and told her she wasn't, and that she didn't need to hit rock bottom to be worthy of change. That moment reminded me why I chose medicine in the first place. It wasn't the prestige or the paycheck. It was about being present, holding space for people when everything feels like it's falling apart. And I finally felt like I was becoming the kind of doctor I always imagined, not just skilled, but human. Back at home, my plant was still alive. I watered it every Saturday. Its leaves leaned toward the window like it knew exactly where the light was coming from. Some days I'd just sit by it, reading or journaling or doing nothing at all. There was something comforting about watching something grow in the same space where I had once felt stuck. I wasn't rushing anymore. Life didn't feel like a race to outrun disaster. It felt like a story I was allowed to write at my own pace. Zach and I stayed close. He met someone that fall, a guy in his photography class, with the softest voice and the kind of laugh that made people turn around in restaurants. I was happy for him. It didn't make our friendship any less solid. We still hung out, still talked about the big stuff and the small stuff. One night, after a late dinner, he said, "You know, I always thought the strongest people were the ones who never needed help. But watching you these past few months, I think I was wrong. Strength looks a lot more like vulnerability than control." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. Because it was true. I'd spent so long believing that being strong meant being silent, that needing anything made me weak. But I wasn't silent anymore, and I wasn't weak. I was someone who had been hurt and healed and learned how to carry that truth without letting it define me. By December, the city was decorated again. Lights on every block, fake snow in storefront windows, and that familiar hum in the air like the whole place was holding its breath for something better. Finals were looming, but I wasn't afraid. I'd faced worse and made it through. On the last day of the semester, I walked out of campus with my backpack slung over one shoulder, my head clear and my heart finally quiet. I didn't have all the answers, but I had enough to keep going. I paused at the corner, watching people rush past me, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Gratitude. Not for the pain, but for what it taught me. For the way it stripped away everything that wasn't real and left me with the truth. That I am enough. That survival isn't the end game. That peace isn't a finish line, it's a way of walking forward. And I was finally walking in that direction. Story 2. My name is Melissa Carter. I'm 58 years old, and until that fateful afternoon, I was the head of compliance at Westbridge Systems, one of the largest electronics manufacturing firms in the Midwest. I had worked there for nearly 3 decades, exactly 28 years and 361 days. I knew every corner of the operation, every financial report, and every irregularity, because I was the one responsible for making sure everything ran by the book, to standard with nothing overlooked. My office was on the 8th floor, almost entirely separate from the technical and admin wings. Quiet, sunlit, and so impeccably organized that people used to jokingly call it the truth box. I've always believed that integrity is the last thing you hold on to when everything else gets swept away. That Wednesday afternoon, it was lightly raining. I was finishing up the Q2 internal audit checklist when the admin assistant walked in and handed me a slip of paper. The CEO wants to see you in the 10th floor conference room right now. I looked up. Was this scheduled? No, but he said you'd understand why. My heart sank slightly. In almost 30 years at Westbridge, I'd never been summoned to the 10th floor without an appointment. That floor wasn't for casual meetings. It was where big decisions or irreversible ones were made. I walked into the conference room where Walter Grant, the recently appointed CEO, just under a year into the job, was already waiting. He was the kind of man whose soft voice somehow sent a chill. On the table sat a slim leather folder positioned with such precision it made me wary. Melissa. He smiled, the kind that never reached his eyes. How long have you been with us? I kept my voice steady. 28 years and 361 days. Nearly 3 decades. That's admirable. He nodded and gently slid the folder toward me. Unfortunately, today will be your last. I looked at him, saying nothing. I didn't need to open the folder to know what this was. Staff reduction, he said, almost like an exhale. Operating costs are tightening. The board had to make some tough calls. I didn't react. I just listened. Every word he spoke felt like an icy blade. Not because it surprised me, but because of how calculated it was. I knew the truth. Next Monday, just 3 days away, all my retirement benefits, everything I'd worked my life to earn, would fully vest in 3 days. I stared at him, eyes unflinching. So this is final. Walter hesitated, perhaps caught off guard by my calm. I know this is hard to accept, but I hope you'll sign the severance agreement. It's fairly generous, given the circumstances. I didn't touch the folder. I stood. Thank you for informing me. He looked surprised. Maybe he was used to tears, begging, and panic, but not from me. I'd reviewed thousands of lines of data over the years. I knew when something smelled rotten, and that room reeked. I left the 10th floor and stepped into the elevator like someone waking up from a long dream. The fluorescent light above flickered softly. I thought, I've always prepared for the worst, but not for betrayal. And that was the moment I knew this wasn't just a firing. This was a calculated strike. A plan designed to erase my life's work without leaving a trace. I returned to my office in silence. The glass door clicked shut behind me like a cold, full stop. Inside, everything was the same. The weekly planner, my half-drunk coffee, the file I'd been reviewing. But I knew after today nothing would be the same. On the desks was the folder Walter had given me, as if someone had already placed it there. Bold print on the cover. Internal severance agreement. I flipped through a few pages. My eyes stopped at clause 12. The employee agrees to waive any right to sue, dispute, or pursue financial claims, including but not limited to pensions and accrued dividends from the time of signing. I set it down, calm. Everything was clear. They weren't cutting budgets. They were cutting me out. A plan calculated down to the hour, the day. If I signed before 5 p.m., tomorrow I'd get 3 months' pay. If I didn't, nothing. No pension, no insurance, no proof of 28 years of service. I picked up the phone and called Kelly, our HR assistant. Melissa. Her voice shrank when she heard mine. Just one question, I said gently. How many others were let go today? A pause. Just you, ma'am. I gave a faint smile. I see. I hung up before she could say more. My hand tightened around the phone. Not from fear, but from clarity. This was a personal elimination, and I was the target. I packed in silence a photo of my late husband, Henry, gone 8 years now from a long illness. The ceramic mug my daughter gave me on my 50th birthday is scribbled with Mom, "You're the strongest person I know," and the framed certificate honoring my 25 years of service, the one they now wanted me to forget, like a spilled ink stain. I left the building escorted by a security guard. I didn't even know. He said nothing except, "Have a good afternoon." The rain had stopped. I sat in my car for a long time listening to the wipers push away, the last drops. My mind wasn't chaotic like I thought it would be. Instead, I felt sharply awake. I drove home through familiar streets, past the bookstore Henry and I used to visit every weekend, past the coffee shop where I met my book club friends. There was a creeping sense of loss, but I wouldn't let it swallow me. Not today. The moment I stepped inside, I poured a glass of water and sat at my desk. I opened Walter's folder, laid out every document, and photographed each page. I wasn't going to sign, but I was going to document every word, every time, and stamp every phrase. Even the handwritten note from Walter on the final page. I hope you understand this is best for everyone. Best for whom? I opened the safe in the corner of my study and pulled out a file I'd kept for 4 years. Memos, emails, and copies of financial reports I had archived whenever something felt off. I had suspected, but never confirmed until 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I discovered a shipment worth over $3 million. $0.0 had been sent without any valid inspection certifications. When I asked, I got a chilling reply from management. Don't complicate things, Melissa. Just trust that the system is working. And now that system had moved to remove me. Not someone who seeks confrontation, but I believe in truth. And this time, the truth wasn't in that severance packet. It was in the numbers they tried to bury. I opened my laptop, typed in my password, and began an email recipient. Andrew F. Walters, an old friend, former investigator with the Office of the Inspector General, and now a special advisor at the Treasury Department. Subject: urgent internal concerns at Westbridge Systems. I don't know what will happen after this email, but I know one thing. They tried to silence me, and they picked the wrong person that night. I didn't sleep, not out of fear, but because my mind wouldn't stop working. I sat in my study, the soft yellow desk lamp casting light over years' worth of carefully sorted and marked documents. Someone once asked why I kept everything so meticulously. I always said occupational habit, but deep down I had known something wasn't right for a long time. Westbridge Systems was never a perfect company. But ever since leadership changed in my 24th year there, something had started to go murky. Temporary expenses, adjustments in quarterly revenue reports, and last-minute approval requests late in the workday. None of it felt coincidental anymore. I opened the safe again, not to double-check documents this time, but to find an old business card I had tucked away in a leather notebook. Henry's anniversary gift to me on our 20th year together. The card was slightly faded. Jonathan Miles, Senior Investigator, Sex, Chicago Division. Jonathan had worked on a joint project with Westbridge 7 years ago. Back then, he was an external auditor. Kind, but sharp as a blade. We'd clashed over a few reports, but I respected how he never compromised with loopholes. I picked up my phone, scrolled through contacts, and stopped at one name, Miles Sec. I wasn't sure if he still used the number, but I called anyway. After 3 rings, a deep and tired male voice answered, "Hello, Jonathan, it's me. Melissa Carter." A pause, then a soft chuckle. I figured I'd never hear your voice again. "What's going on, Melissa? Are you still with the SEC?" "I'm an independent investigative consultant now, but I still collaborate on special cases." "Why?" I took a deep breath. "I need to talk. Something serious is happening at Westbridge, and I have proof." His tone shifted instantly. "What kind of proof are we talking about?" "The kind that could keep a boardroom up at night. I need to meet with you as soon as possible." We arranged to meet the next morning at a law office in suburban Evanston, a place discreet enough to stay under the radar but formal enough for me to safely present everything. That morning, I wore a light gray suit, the one I saved for board meetings. I brought 3 file binders organized by year, along with a backup USB drive, encrypted. Jonathan was already there. He no longer had the thick brown hair I remembered, but the sharpness in his eyes hadn't faded when I laid the folders on the table. He stared at me for a moment before asking, his voice more serious than it had been the night before, "Are you sure you want to go through with this, Melissa? If this is what you say it is, we're not talking about an isolated case. This would trigger a federal investigation." I nodded without hesitation. "I don't want to." But they left me no choice. For the next 2 hours, I laid out everything. Emails, reports, and timelines. From requests to align data with media strategy, to backdated quality certifications, to vague representation expenses, with no documented destination. When I finished, Jonathan leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the pile in front of him. "They terminated you before your retirement kicked in, didn't they?" 3 days before, I said flatly. He nodded. "That's the dumbest thing they've ever done. And it might be what brings their entire system down." I said nothing. But inside I knew this was the point of no return. Jonathan continued, "I'm sending this directly to the Office of Special Investigations in DC. I'll need you to stay in close contact. And Melissa, don't sign anything, no matter how many times they call." I nodded. "I won't sign. I spent nearly 3 decades doing things by the book. I won't let them take it all away with a trap disguised as paperwork. When I left the office, the sun was high. A soft breeze lifted my hair, and I felt lighter than I had in days. Not because anything was resolved, but because finally I had acted. And this time the truth wouldn't be brushed aside again. Monday morning, I arrived at the federal building in downtown Chicago, where Jonathan had arranged a meeting with the SEC investigation team. I brought 3 boxes of documents and a hard drive containing over 1,000 pages of evidence. Everything is cataloged by timeline and severity. Every note, every email, and every signed report is preserved. Because I had a gut feeling this day would come. The investigative team was waiting in a glass-walled conference room. The bright white lighting reflecting off dry erase boards lining the walls alongside Jonathan were 2 others. Lisa Moreno, lead counsel for internal investigations, and Brant Hutchins, financial data analyst. His face was as serious as if every number was a red flag. "Let me be clear," Lisa began after a handshake. "From this moment on, everything you share with us becomes part of a formal federal investigation. It cannot be withdrawn. Are you sure you want to proceed, Melissa?" I nodded firmly. "I've already lost everything. They didn't give me any other option." Jonathan opened the first box, flipping through documents with laser focus. Brant connected the hard drive to his laptop, scanning the files I had organized: falsified revenue reports, executive emails pushing for inflated profit margins, and personal logs of suspicious meetings. Within 30 minutes, the room was silent, just the sounds of keystrokes, pages turning, and the occasional sigh. Brant looked up first, locking eyes with me. "Do you realize what you've brought us?" "All I know is those numbers aren't honest, and I can't keep pretending not to see it." Lisa nodded slowly. "Westbridge inflated revenue by at least 18% over the past 2 years. Your files match internal tax filings we've had concerns about. But what interests me most is what happened before David Langston arrived." I nodded and slid another binder toward her. "The misconduct didn't start with Langston. He just took it further. But the earliest signs began under the previous CEO, Harold Brantley." Jonathan nodded slowly. "I've heard that name." Brantley left quietly, no questions asked. "But it sounds like we need to revisit everything." I turned to an old email thread of exchanges between Brantley and the former head of finance, requesting a minor adjustment to quarterly numbers to maintain shareholder confidence. Brant stared at the screen. "This isn't short-term fraud. This is a systematic financial misrepresentation strategy." Lisa closed the binder. "We'll be issuing a formal inquiry to Westbridge's executive board immediately. We'll also contact the regional point use attorney's office." "But Melissa," she paused, locking eyes with me. "You'll need legal counsel. And from this point on, do not contact anyone at Westbridge directly. All communication will go through us." "I understand," I said, voice calm but resolute. "I'm not going back there." Jonathan stood and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing. I know this isn't easy. But from now on, you're not alone." As I left the building, April sunlight lit the granite steps beneath my feet. People hurried past, unaware that a middle-aged woman had just launched one of the largest financial investigations in the Midwest's manufacturing industry. I don't know what lies ahead, but I know one thing: the silence is over. 3 days after that meeting with the SEC team, my phone started ringing nonstop from early morning. Unknown numbers. No voicemails I didn't answer. I knew exactly where those calls were coming from. By late morning, an email popped up in my personal inbox. Urgent letter from the Westbridge Systems Executive Board. I opened it, and just the first line told me everything was starting to shift. "Dear Miss Melissa Carter, we hereby inform you that the decision to terminate your employment on the 17th has been fully revoked. You are reinstated as a full employee, along with all associated benefits, including your pension and insurance program." Just beneath that, in faint italics, "We would also like to discuss with you a potential special advisory role during the upcoming restructuring phase." I sat still for a few minutes, not because I was surprised, but because of how pitifully they were managing the crisis. There was no apology, not a single line admitting wrongdoing or just damage control dressed up as goodwill. I called my attorney Donna Reynolds, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 60s who never trusted anything that came with a friendly handshake. I read the email aloud to her. She scoffed. "Did they really think you'd be thrilled and jump right back in there trying to save face?" I replied. "They know the SEC is digging, and they're desperate," Donna said, "because they know you can bring down their entire structure." We agreed not to respond immediately. Instead, Donna sent a brief legal notice. Miss Melissa Carter will not participate in any discussions without her legal counsel and independent investigative representatives present. That afternoon, a member of the board, Mr. Russell McMahon, called my landline at home. He didn't leave a message. When I picked up, he kept it short. "Melissa, I hope you understand. We were just following protocol. No one on the board truly wanted you gone. We were under pressure. I cut him off. Pressure from whom, Mr. Russell? From yourself or from the man your board voted to install? We should speak in person about a mutually beneficial arrangement. I paused, then answered firmly. I'll meet, but not at your offices. And I'm not coming alone. 2 days later, the meeting took place at a neutral law office in Chicago. I came with Donna and a representative from the SEC, just as we had stipulated. Their side included 3 people: Russell, the head of legal, and David Langston, the man who cost me my career. Now he sat across from me looking tired, his neatly combed hair unable to hide the tension of dealing with media storms and mounting investigations. Russell spoke first. We regret that things unfolded this way, Miss Carter. The board wishes to make amends. We'd like to offer you a consulting role. Double the salary, remote work, full scheduling, and autonomy. I'm not here to negotiate employment. I cut him off. I'm here to be clear. I'm not signing any gag order. I'm not returning in exchange for silence. I want a full investigation in public if necessary. David looked at me, his eyes vacant. Maybe he never believed I'd have the courage to bring it all into the light. Melissa, this doesn't have to go that far. You took away 28 years of my career with one signature. I said, if you think I'll come back and pretend like nothing happened, you've clearly underestimated me. Donna slid a document across the table prepared by the SEC. A list of 17 formal requests requiring Westbridge's official response, including full budget approval processes, 5 years of financial reports, and all meetings involving revenue adjustment strategies. None of the 3 dared to sign on the spot. You're not willing to cooperate with the board to resolve this internally? Russell asked one last time, a mix of desperation and arrogance in his tone. I tried to do that for 4 years, I answered without hesitation. But when I needed the board, no one spoke up. Now it's time I let the truth speak for itself. I stood, left the room, and didn't look back at their uneasy faces. I wasn't after revenge. I just wanted the truth to come out. And now the wheels of justice were in motion and wouldn't stop just because of a few hollow promises. 3 days after that tense meeting, I sat quietly in my home office, unlocking my personal safe. There was one file I hadn't handed over to the SEC, not because I forgot, but because I was waiting for the right moment. And now, with Westbridge showing signs of panic, that moment had arrived. The file had a red label handwritten in black ink. Internal correspondence, Q3 and Q4 Brantley era. Inside were printed emails between Harold Brantley, former CEO of Westbridge, and 3 board members from that time, Russell McMahon, Linda Rowe, and Carlton Daniels. The contents didn't just show that they were aware of report adjustment tactics. They revealed they were directly instructing the finance department to legitimize fictitious revenue. One attachment from the former head accountant even suggested allocating unrealized profits to the current quarter to maintain shareholder confidence. I sent the entire file to Jonathan and Lisa with a short note. I think it's time we complete the full picture. Jonathan called me almost immediately. Melissa, this isn't just adding fuel to the fire. This is the match. And I replied calmly, it's time to strike it. That night I didn't turn on the TV, but I didn't need to. Over 10 financial news sites ran the headline, Beth expands investigation into Westbridge systems. Board members implicated investors demanded transparency, and Westbridge stock plunged 30%. The next morning, the Wall Street Bulletin devoted its front page to the story. The bold headline read, Whistleblower at 58. Melissa Carter and the fight for truth. And didn't call me a victim. They called me the one who stood up. By noon, for Westbridge, executives submitted their resignations. Russell, Linda, and Carlton among them. The same names are found in the documents I just released. The fourth was Doris Meeks, Director of Communications, who had overseen the PR team's efforts to craft a narrative of positive recovery. I heard the news in a call from Dana, her voice carrying a smile. You did what an entire external audit committee couldn't. Brought down a crumbling power structure from the inside. And David Langston? I asked. Dana paused, then said, officially terminated this morning. No severance, no honors, no farewell. I didn't celebrate. I simply stepped out onto the back porch and sat on the wooden chair Henry once built. A soft May breeze moved through my hair, carrying the scent of change, the scent of truth, finally stepping out of the shadows. The media kept digging. Major investors demanded direct talks with the SEC. Some proposed a class action suit for a prolonged lack of transparency, resulting in financial losses. A partner bank announced it was suspending all cooperation until the investigation concluded. Westbridge, once seen as a symbol of stability in the Midwest manufacturing sector, was now scrambling to salvage what little reputation it had left. Jonathan texted me. They're trying to save the building, but the foundations are already rotted, I replied. Then at least let them clean up the rubble the right way. This story is no longer about me. It's become a message, a wake-up call to those who believe silence would always serve power. And I, a 58-year-old woman, was once cast out for telling the truth. I'm now living proof that the opposite is just as powerful. The fight wasn't over yet, but for the first time in years, I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer alone. 6 months after I walked out of that law office with the final batch of evidence, I sat in a federal courtroom facing the other side of the long table, covered in blue felt. David Langston entered first. Same expensive suit, same arrogant stride. But this time, his eyes didn't dart around. They were simply empty. Behind him came Carlton Daniels and Linda Rowe, 2 of the 3 board members who used to smile at me during quarterly meetings. They said nothing, walking in quietly like forgotten pawns at the end of a chess game. And then they sat together in the defendant's seats. The judge read the charges: securities fraud, falsifying financial statements, and withholding material information from investors. The evidence gathered by the SEC, including the documents I provided, left no room for doubt. In front of federal prosecutors, reporters, and major investors, all 3 admitted to their wrongdoing. There were no outbursts, no justifications. I looked at David, the man who had cast me aside like I was just another name on a layoff list. Our eyes met for a fleeting second, just long enough for me to see it. Not guilt, but defeat. After the hearing, I was brought into a private office to receive official notice from the CSRC. Lisa, who had led the investigation from the very beginning, gave me a quiet smile and handed me a thick envelope along with a document sealed in red. Whistleblower Award under SEC Whistleblower Protection Provisions. I opened it and could hardly believe my eyes. 15% of the total fines collected from the case is enough to live the rest of my life without worrying about insurance, medical bills, or retirement. Donna, my attorney, stepped forward and placed a hand on my shoulder. You saw it through. Now it's time to rebuild on your terms. That evening, I sat in the warm kitchen of the lakeside cabin I had moved into after everything settled. This was the home Henry and I once dreamed of, though we never got the chance to make it real until now. I had turned it into reality, a quiet place where golden afternoon light spilled through the windows. Waves lapped gently on the shore, and memories of the only man who ever told me, your attention to detail isn't a weakness, it's your superpower. And I decided to do something in his name. 3 months later, the Henry Carter Scholarship Fund was officially established. Its goal is to support women pursuing careers in ethics and corporate compliance fields often dismissed as dull or unglamorous, yet which I believe are the moral backbone of any economic system. The launch ceremony was small but dignified, held at my alma mater. As I stepped up to speak and saw the faces of young students smiling at me with admiration, I felt something I hadn't in nearly 3 decades. I hadn't been pushed out of the old world, but I was opening a new door for the next one. My story didn't end with a verdict or a payout. It continued through scholarship letters from young women saying they wanted to stand up for transparency, notes of gratitude from single mothers, or from a Latina student who said she never thought she could study finance until she read my story. I was no longer. Melissa was fired 3 days before retirement. I was Melissa Carter, the woman who chose not to stay silent, and I knew that would outlast any court case, any number, any corporation. And on quiet afternoons when my granddaughter runs, giggling through the yard and laughter echoes through the pine trees, I smile quietly because I didn't let my life end with a period. I turned it into a reminder. The truth can be buried, but it never disappears. 1 week after the trial ended, I received a FedEx envelope from Westbridge Systems inside. It was a 3-page letter printed on gold-trimmed letterhead, signed by interim CEO Patricia Donovan on behalf of the new board. She offered a sincere apology and invited me to return as a strategic ethics advisor with full schedule flexibility, a private office, and an unlimited compensation package. I read every line, folded the letter, and placed it in the drawer where I'd once kept my very first employee badge from 28 years ago. Not out of nostalgia, but because I understood a chapter had ended, and I didn't need to go back to know I had done the right thing. I sent back a short, polite, but firm reply. I am not seeking titles or compensation for what I needed. I have already received it not from the company, but from my conscience. I will not return. I wish you well in rebuilding a kinder Westbridge. Afterward, I began working with the SEC and several legislative organizations, joining advisory teams on whistleblower protection policy at both state and federal levels. We discussed ways to expand legal support, streamline response protocols, and, most importantly, prevent the kind of subtle retaliation I endured at 59. For the first time, I was sitting on the other side of the table not to defend, but to decide. At a policy conference in Washington, D.C., a young compliance officer approached me, eyes brimming with emotion. "I was thinking of quitting after discovering misconduct at my company," she said. "But then I read about you, and I realized speaking up isn't destruction, it's repair. Thank you for not backing down." I couldn't help but smile. "I wasn't the first," I replied. "I'm just one of many who stopped being afraid. Now it's your turn." The rest of the week, I live quietly in my Michigan lakeside cabin, Henry's dream retirement spot with me in the mornings. I brew coffee and sit on the porch watching the sunrise over the still water. In the evenings, I walk with my granddaughter, listening to her talk about school and how she dreams of becoming a therapist, so people who feel unheard will finally be listened to. Every weekend, my daughter Rachel visits with her husband and kids. The little ones play in the yard while we gather around the grill, stitching memories together, laughing more than crying. Rachel once told me, "Mom, you're not just a symbol of integrity. You taught me how to stand tall even when the wind is against you, and I know that's the greatest reward I've ever received." Sometimes the media still brings up my story in business ethics panels or policy reform reports. One magazine once called me the woman who made the system stop and look at itself, but I never let that title pull me away from real life. I'm still Melissa Carter, the woman who quietly checked every number and every report and who, when something was wrong, refused to look away. Once, during a national radio interview, the host asked me if you could go back. Would you stay silent to stay safe? I answered without hesitation. I lost my job, nearly lost my reputation, and faced a long season of loneliness. But if I had to do it again, I'd still choose the truth. Because some things, like dignity, aren't worth trading for any pension. Now, my story isn't just a case file, it's a symbol for anyone who's ever felt alone in a dangerous system. I no longer need to prove anything to anyone. I just need to keep living in alignment with who I am, as I always have, and trust that somewhere, someone standing at the crossroads between silence and speaking up might hear this quiet reminder. You are not alone, and the truth will always find a way to be heard. My story isn't just a fight for justice. It's proof that even when the truth is buried deep, it still rises. I was once dismissed, called a problem, but my resolve and ethics turned me from someone forgotten into a symbol of integrity. Today, I live peacefully with my family, helping build stronger protections for whistleblowers, so no one ever has to choose between their career and the truth, the way I once did. What do you think about Melissa's choice? Would you have the courage to stand up like she did? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful, inspiring stories about family and integrity.